everyone, it's Esther. We've finally reached the last history lesson in this module, so stay with me so we can learn about how Canada finally becomes a country. In the previous lesson, we learned about the rebellion of 1837 and 38, where a lot of people in Canada wanted a more democratic government and less British colonial power. A man named Lord Durham recommended that Upper Canada and Lower Canada be joined together into one area called the Province of Canada. And this recommendation did happen in 1840. Unfortunately, Lord Durham also recommended that the French Canadiens become more like the English, and they should become Protestant and speak English. Well, you can imagine this was not a popular idea with the French people in Lower Canada. What is most important at this time is that Lord Durham recommended that in order for the country to have a better form of democracy, there needed to be something called responsible government. This means that the ministers of the Crown or the Queen must have the support of at least half of the elected representatives. That's a majority. They can't stay in government if they do not have a majority. The first British colony to have a full responsible government was Nova Scotia in 1847 and 8. This is important because we still have this system of responsible government today. So if a government in power loses what is called a confidence vote on an important decision or policy, for example, a budget, the government must resign. So that is why it's important for us to understand about this history of responsible government and how it still is relevant to us today. Here is a picture of Sir Louis Hippolyte Lafontaine. He was the first head of responsible government in 1849 in the Canadas, or the Province of Canada. This was like the role of a prime minister. He pushed to keep French language rights as well. Now let's take a look at the picture at the top right of page 18 in your Discover Canada guide. We see the fathers of Confederation. And Confederation is the big deal in this lesson because it was when the colonies came together to form Canada with federal and provincial governments. Above the photo, it tells us that the Dominion of Canada was established on July 1st, 1867. From 1864 to 1867, representatives from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and the Province of Canada, with British support, worked together to form the new country. And this is why these men were called the Fathers of Confederation. The Province of Canada was split back into two provinces, and we now know those as Ontario and Quebec. So now, looking on this map, we see the first four provinces that made up Canada at the time of Confederation: Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Ontario, and Quebec. Each province had its own government and was given the responsibility of health and education. Officially, the British government passed the British North America Act in 1867, and Canada was called the Dominion of Canada. Until 1982, July 1st was called Dominion Day, to remember the day Canada became a self-governing country. Since 1982, we call it Canada Day. But let's talk about that word Dominion for a moment. At the bottom of page 18 in your guide, we see a section that describes why the word Dominion was used to name Canada. The word comes from the Bible. In Psalms 72, there is a phrase that says, "Dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth." And this phrase really does a good job of describing the idea that Canada would one day be a powerful, rich, and free country, and at some point would go from sea to sea, or from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. So the word dominion was put into the Constitution, and it's part of our history. This idea of expanding the Dominion of Canada to the west was a dream for Sir George Etienne Cartier. He was a father of Confederation from Quebec, and he was responsible for bringing the Northwest Territories, Manitoba, and British Columbia into Canada. So now let's take a look at a map that will help us see when each province and territory joined Canada. Okay, so looking at the map, we already know that the very first provinces that make up Canada were Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario in 1867. Just a few years later, in 1870, the Northwest Territories and Manitoba joined. In 1871, British Columbia joined Canada, and in 1873, Prince Edward Island came in, and then in 1898, the Yukon Territory. In 1905, Alberta and Saskatchewan joined Canada, and then, quite a bit later, in 1949, Newfoundland and Labrador joined. Much later, in 1999, Nunavut became its own territory, separated from the eastern part of the Northwest Territories. You can find this list at the top of page 19 in your Discover Canada guide. Also on page 19 is a very important historical person, Canada's first Prime Minister. His name was Sir John A. Macdonald, and he was born in Scotland. He was a lawyer first, and he was famous for enjoying parties, sometimes a bit too much. You can see his picture on the $10 bill. And also, I've got a picture here of John and I sitting on a bench in Charlottetown, PEI. Okay, we got it done. Canada has finally become a country. We're going to look at a timeline now, but this time it's going to be a timeline that is focused on the provinces of Ontario and Quebec, because you probably noticed there were a lot of changes to those two provinces in the time leading up to Confederation. These timelines really help me keep the dates and times organized too. So I'm going to start from the time right after the Battle of the Plains of Abraham. Remember that? Way back in 1759, when Britain won the battle, the colony of New France was named the province of Quebec. We learned that in 1791, the Constitutional Act was introduced and divided the province of Quebec into Upper and Lower Canada. After the rebellions of 1837 and 38, Lord Durham recommended that Upper and Lower Canada be joined again to form the province of Canada. So now we have the province of Canada in 1840. And then just 27 years later, we have Confederation in 1867, and the province of Canada was divided once again into Ontario and Quebec. I hope that timeline helped you as well. It does help me. Okay, so that's it. This is the end of the Canada's History Part 1 module, and we'll see you in the next module. Have a great day.